Mr. Speaker, it's indeed a great honor to be standing here this evening. We stand in a historic place, and we look forward to a historic anniversary. Our 150th celebration is coming as a nation. And we look back to 100 years from today when Prime Minister Borden was bringing in a Naturalization Act that precipitated the Citizenship Act of 1947, and here we are today, generations later, finally updating our Citizenship Act. We stand in the name of great people. I'm honored to represent people from West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country, people who really care about their citizenship, a varied populace, people of different ethnic backgrounds, of First Nations backgrounds, people who cherish their citizenship. I stand in the name of my father and my uncle. My late father was a prisoner of war in World War II. My late uncle, Smokey Smith, was the last surviving Victoria Cross holder. And I'm very proud, and I know that they would be very proud this day to be considering what we are doing in protecting the rights of Canadian citizens and in ensuring the rights of a group that I'm about to speak about, the Lost Canadians. And I'm proud to speak on behalf of my predecessor, the former Member of Parliament for this riding, John Reynolds, who was an ardent advocate for the Lost Canadians, for people whose rights will be restored in this bill, Bill C-24. And I'm proud to speak on behalf of constituents who've worked for this day, people like Don Chapman, who helped John Reynolds on his way to advocate for Lost Canadians. Mr. Speaker, given these personal connections, I'm also very glad to speak on behalf of all Canadians who, from coast to coast, have been watching the evolution of this bill and who have waited with anticipation for us to do something that, again, is truly historic. Mr. Speaker, the measures in this Bill C-24 represent the first comprehensive reforms to the Citizenship Act in more than a generation. And they deserve the support of every member in this House. Canadian citizenship is central to our identity, values, and traditions, a tremendous source of pride for all of us who are fortunate to have it. Generations of Canadians have made great sacrifices to defend our way of life, to ensure that our country remains strong and free, and to guarantee the rights and responsibilities that come with citizenship. Among those Canadians are people that I've mentioned, and there's others, but the people who have returned from Afghanistan so recently, in that poignant ceremony that we celebrated, the Day of Honor, those are people who are watching this evening. In short, Mr. Speaker, Canadian citizenship is precious, and it should never be taken for granted, and its value must always be preserved and strengthened whenever possible. That's why Bill C-24 is such an important piece of legislation. As I foreshadowed in my opening remarks, I'd like to focus on one particular measure in this bill, the restoration of citizenship to those who are known as the Lost Canadians. Mr. Speaker, under the 1947 Canadian Citizenship Act, there were groups of people who were either not eligible for citizenship or who lost their citizenship for various reasons. This included people born outside Canada to a Canadian parent and people born in Canada who naturalized in another country. People who might have justifiably but erroneously thought they were Canadians due to outdated and inconsistent provisions in previous citizenship legislation. Those affected by these provisions became popularly known as Lost Canadians. Some Lost Canadians spent many years of their lives believing in their hearts that they were Canadian citizens and publicly identified themselves as such. They didn't realize that they didn't actually have Canadian citizenship. In some cases, the bad news of their actual status came as a nasty surprise when, for example, they applied for a Canadian passport for the first time. Other Lost Canadians spent many years yearning for the citizenship they felt was rightfully theirs, if not for outdated legal provisions. Mr. Speaker, this was a unique and unfortunate situation, and I'm sure all of us in this House can sympathize with the plight of these unlucky individuals. Over time, many Lost Canadians asked the Government of Canada to give them citizenship. 4.5 years ago, building on the advocacy of my predecessor John Reynolds and others, the government did just that. In 2009, significant changes to Canada's citizenship legislation were implemented. The changes restored citizenship, or granted it for the first time, to the vast majority of lost Canadians. The amendments reflected the seriousness with which our government takes the issue of people's citizenship. On the day that law came into effect, most lost Canadians automatically obtained their citizenship retroactively, as of the date they lost their citizenship if they were former citizens, or as of the date of their birth. Many of my honorable colleagues may remember the day in April 2009 when this law came into effect. There was a lot of media coverage of what was naturally a very happy story of these lost Canadians, so-called returning home. In fact, a number of former lost Canadians showed up here in Parliament Hill that day, determined to celebrate the restoration of their citizenship and to apply for a Canadian passport at their earliest opportunity. Mr. Speaker, our government resolved the vast majority of lost Canadian cases in 2009, and we're committed now to fix the remaining ones. The Liberals could have done this, but they failed to do so. Although the 2009 legislation did cover the overwhelming majority of lost Canadians, there still remained a small number of people who did not benefit from those changes. The lost Canadians who gained citizenship under the provisions of Bill C-24, the bill we see before us this evening, fall into three categories. People born or naturalized in Canada before 1947 who subsequently lost their British subject status and didn't become Canadian citizens on January 1, 1947. Secondly, British subjects ordinarily resident in Canada prior to 1947 who did not become citizens on January 1, 1947. And thirdly, children born abroad in the first generation to any parent who was born, naturalized, or were British subjects ordinarily resident in Canada prior to 1947. Mr. Speaker, here's what Bill Jansen, consultant for the Central Mennonite Committee, said about our Bill C-24. I'm quoting, "I welcome the government's decision to include lost Canadians in their changes to the Citizenship Act. The decision will improve the situation of people born outside of Canada who until now were deemed ineligible for Canadian citizenship. For instance, someone who was born out of wedlock before 1947 to a Canadian father and a non-Canadian mother did not automatically gain Canadian citizenship when the 1947 law came into force. Neither did someone born in wedlock to a Canadian mother and a non-Canadian father. Mr. Speaker, it goes without saying that these, seen from our perspective today, are archaic provisions. That's why the measures in Bill C-24 pertaining to remaining lost Canadians are so timely and necessary. In summary, these measures that I've advocated for since becoming an MP, much of which time I was on the Citizenship and Immigration Committee, these measures, they'd extend citizenship to more lost Canadians born before 1947 and their children born in the first generation outside Canada who didn't benefit from the 2009 changes. It's proposed to extend citizenship to these individuals retroactively to January 1, 1947, or to their date of birth if they were born after this date. Mr. Speaker, I urge all honourable members of this House to join me in supporting the passage of this bill in order to ensure that Canadian citizenship remains strong and that we can ensure these lost Canadians are welcomed and remain a part of the Canadian family. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.